Walt Whitman was born on a family farm in Long Island in 1819. He lived there and Brooklyn with his family between the 1820s and 1830s. He attended the Brooklyn public schools off and on until he was 11. At that age, he dropped out and became a printer's apprentice at the Long Island Patriot. Eventually, he started working as a printer. Then, from 1836 to 1841, he taught at a one-room schoolhouse in Long Island. He hated this, and then took up journalism. He founded the Long Islander, which was a weekly paper in New York. He then worked at the Brooklyn Eagle and became an editor. The Brooklyn Eagle was a more conservative paper, very against abolition and all that. And Walt Whitman was too liberal for the paper, and he quit the editing post. After that, he took a job as the editor of the Crescent in New Orleans. When in New Orleans, he experienced the slave trade and how horrible it was, and so his views completely changed. After his sojourn in New Orleans, he began writing poetry. His first book of poetry was Leaves of Grass, which was first published in 1855. He claimed that poetry was the direction of his dreams. Leaves of Grass was a collection of wild and exuberant poems which he constantly revised and expanded. One of his biggest inspirations was Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was particularly moved by Emerson's call to American writers to free themselves of the courtly upper-class muse of old Europe and find inspiration in the experiences of everyday Americans. Whitman does this in Leaves of Grass. A Song for Occupations. In the labor of engines and trade, and the labor of the fields, I find the developments, and find the eternal meanings. Eventually, the Civil War began, and Whitman wanted to help in some way, but he was too old to serve. His brother, George Washington Whitman, was a colonel in the war, and he was wounded at the Battle of Fredericksburg. Walt went to Washington, D.C. to take care of him. Then, overcome by the suffering of the soldiers, he stayed in Washington, D.C., and began to take care of the wounded in the hospital. It was in Washington, D.C., and he developed strong relationships with many of the soldiers that he took care of. The Civil War caused him to fear the possible failure of American democracy, and he eventually recounted his experiences in the Civil War in a book called Drum Taps, published in 1865. His poetry in this time would begin to demonstrate his vision of democracy as people acting collectively and pragmatically to secure a meaningful political freedom. After this, he moved to Camden, New Jersey, where he had a quiet life and spent time with his many admirers. He eventually died on March 26, 1892. His writings and poetry are recognized as some of the most important pieces of American literature. His work is known worldwide. He introduced the Whitman way of writing, a unique writing style that had never been done before. And he introduced many American culture to many different countries around the world.